Hello and welcome to this video on saving the spent grain from your brewing of beer to make bread. When you're making beer, either as a whole grain or partial grain mash, you have a lot of leftover material, primarily the cracked and milled grain you've used in the process of creating your initial fermentables. This could either be used to feed animals, put in the garden, or used to make bread. Bread is perhaps the most productive use you can find for it, and if not yourself, you more than likely know someone who can use it. The recipe we have in this video is the most universally friendly with people who have allergies and other dietary requirements. Some other recipes will call for the inclusion of milk, egg, and other known allergens. Our recipe is far more simple and in line with a regular loaf of bread. The distinction we make is that where most recipes require simply having flour, yeast, and water, we incorporate a few other ingredients, including the spent grains, to create a more wholesome bread. The general ingredients required for this are 1 part flour, we use a white flour, to a half part of wholemeal flour, 1 part of spent grains, 1 part water, and yeast. You may also choose to add salt, oil, and other ingredients to improve your bread flavor and longevity. We begin by combining all of the dry ingredients. It's worth noting here you can either keep your spent grains and dry them, or use them fresh, that is, once they've cooled down from being mashed. Either way, combine your dry ingredients, which for this video is our flour. The combination of wholemeal and white flour creates a more filling and chewy loaf in our opinion. Then to this, we add the activated yeast. We find in this particular type of bread, activating your yeast with a little bit of sugar and warm water before using it is more effective than adding it directly to your mixture. To the combination of activated yeast and flour, we add our spent grains. This is, as said, a 1-to-1 ratio for the white flour. Because these grains are fresh, they have a far higher moisture content. If you are using either dried grains or those that were a little drier, you may need to consider either increasing the amount of water you are adding, or alternatively, increasing the number of grains you are adding. This is because the wholemeal flour soaks up a lot of this moisture very quickly. Once you've combined all of your ingredients, mix it until it begins to come together. From here, you need to take it out and begin kneading it on a smooth surface with a little bit of flour on it. This brings all of the ingredients together in a nice neat package. Specifically, we're talking about the gluten, and you'll know that the gluten has achieved its proper binding to itself when you can see that the dough begins to stretch rather than crack or tear. From here, you transfer it back into a bowl with a little bit of oil in the bottom to prevent the dough ball from sticking to it. You could also use grease, butter, and similar. Leave this to sit for between 30 and 60 minutes. After that, you take it out and you punch it down. This removes some of those gas bubbles, and it gives it a chance to rise a second time. During this process, we normally split it in half between the 2 loaves we're going to make. That is between the taking it out and the punching it down, and then leaving it to rise a second time. Somewhere at that point, we divide it into 2 loaves. These loaves then go into their baking pan each. They're left to sit for another 30 to 60 minutes. While the loaves sit, we begin warming the oven. The oven is set to 200 degrees Celsius. This is somewhere around 380 to 390 degrees Fahrenheit. As we're about to put the loaves in the oven, we decrease the temperature from 200 degrees to 190 degrees. We then place them in the oven between 30 and 50 minutes each. The time required may vary slightly depending on the sort of oven you are baking in, the time for which the temperature is going to hold at the right temperature after you open the door, and more factors. So take that time frame with a little bit of salt. You may need less or more, but more likely more if anything goes wrong. At the end of that time, take your loaf out of the oven and leave it to sit for 5 to 10 minutes. This will help the loaf separate from the sides of the tin. You can then pour it out and sit it on the bench to cool down to room temperature. Here we've cut it early on for dramatic effect. You are best off sitting it on the bench for between half an hour to an hour until it cools down to room temperature. This ensures you aren't tearing it apart and it's more structurally sound. This will give you a more solid loaf later on. Although making a loaf of bread may not be the most exciting of activities, it's a more useful way to use your spent grains than throwing them out or in the garden. You may prefer to feed them to certain animals if that's your thing, but for us, it simply seems impractical and unnecessary to waste a product that you could otherwise make use of. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.